Welcome back. Whoa, always that first burst. We are now in the home stretch here at LA CoMotion, our final sessions of the afternoon before we get to the reveal of the grand winner of the LA Mobility Challenge in a couple hours. But first, we're going to have a couple of panels, a fireside chat, and a great program here to take us to the very end. And next up here, we've talked a little bit about electric vehicles today with Peter Schwarzenbauer from BMW and Mini. But this next session is going to really dwell upon models of deployment for EVs, fleet management, buses, everything beyond just the notion of buying an electric car. And so how will we deploy them and charge them? And for that, I'd like to welcome up our moderator, Benoit George, who is the head of Ideas and Debates Department at LeEco. Thank you, Benoit.
Hey, yeah, it works. For everyone, yeah, my name is Benoit Georges. I know many people have difficulty to say it in English. I'm a French journalist. I'm coming from a newspaper in France called Les Echos, which is a financial and economical main newspaper in France. And we are going to talk about vehicles and only electricity. This session will be 100% electric. And for that, I'd like to welcome on stage the panelists, if they want to come in. No, we're already talking together, but maybe we should talk. All of us. Thank you very much. So to talk about that, we've got to discuss about electrical vehicles. We have a representative of an industrial company who produces all kinds of vehicles, Stella Lee, president of BYD. We have someone from a startup that's trying to reinvent the electric car. It's Carl Thomas, Katie Newman from eVelocity. We've got another person from another startup, a startup called Envoi, or ECG. And we've got someone from a government, Julia Rose, which is head of mobility at the German Ministry of Transportation. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being there. And before talking to them, I will try to ask a question to the audience. How many of you have ever drove an electric car? Please raise your hand. Yeah, not so bad. How many of you really own an electric car? Oh, I barely see 3 of them. The lights are not easy. And how many consider seriously of buying an electric car? Well, a bit much, but that's kind of all the problem. For the moment, everybody thinks that electric vehicles will change the game, will be a game changer. It will be very important for the environment to have zero-emission cars, but nobody buys them, or 3 people buy them in the audience, which is not much. And to start, my first question will go to you, Katie, because you used to work for the automotive industry for a long time. You worked for Volkswagen and many companies, and now you work for a startup that's trying to reinvent the cars. Why should we reinvent them, the electric cars?
Yeah, Benoit, thank you very much. And it's interesting to see this picture. That's exactly, like I worked 30 years in the auto industry, and I always heard all the reasons, and I must admit I was part of this reasoning, why it's so difficult to do an electric car. And there's so many reasons. They're expensive, the batteries are heavy, it's a waste of resources, you can't charge them, people don't want them, and you hear all these things. And when you start dealing with them and do them and drive them, you see, first of all, that it's very exciting to drive an electric car, that they can solve your mobility problem. But you also see that some of these problems are really hard. For example, electric cars are expensive. Who can afford an electric car? And so I came to a point in my career where I said, I'd like to turn that around. And I'd like to ask the question, what needs to be true? That everyone in this audience and everyone at all can drive an electric car. And the answer to that is that then you have to change everything.
What has gone wrong precisely? If you know the industry, what did you do wrong in the years where you tried? I know you worked for example, the electric Golf at Volkswagen. What was wrong with that?
Well, it was a great car, but it looked exactly like a combustion engine car. The intention was to make it drive exactly like a combustion engine car, and I think that's exactly the wrong promise. Because we said, this is a car which looks the same, drives the same, and costs the same like a combustion engine car, and that is not true. And this promise cannot be delivered. They are different, they have different requirements, and for some time they will also be more expensive, so we need to use them differently. If I want to build an electric SUV, which I can use in the city, and I can drive long distance, I can quick charge it, it should cost the same like a combustion engine SUV, it's not going to happen. So we have to have different cars for different applications, like cars for cities, cars for overland drive, and we have to share those cars. We cannot, if we own, the car I have, it stands around like 90% of its time. I don't use it, but I have to pay for it. So we have to share these cars, we have to come to different usage models. So my theory is we need different cars, and we need to use them differently.
So your company now, eVelocity, is trying to invent this car. What will it look like? What will be the difference? Because from what I understand, we won't see them before 2 or 3 years. So what will you do to change exactly?
Yeah, you will see them from 21, and they will look entirely different from our today's cars, which is a big statement. But actually, I'm surprised that the electric cars which we see, which we drive today, which are on the road, they look exactly like the combustion engine cars. They have a trunk in front, and then we don't need them and call it frunk. And they still look like engine, compartment, and then trunk. So we have more possibilities. So our car will like put everything down in the chassis, the motors, the battery. We get a totally flat chassis or skateboard, how we call it. And then we can build a car on it, and our car will be the size smaller than a Prius, but from the inside we will have space like the largest SUV, like the largest utility.
And it will be focused on what usage? Something for the city, something for sports?
Yes, the main usage is for cities, because with the small footprint, it's much easier to park this car. It has capacity for your family, but also it could be a great car for ride-hailing or taxi type of service. And it's intended to be shared. I don't believe that people will, on the long run, we will not sell this car. We will only subscribe it.
Okay, so it means you will share it between various owners, or you will be a subscriber and have my car for a month or for a year or whatever?
In the beginning, you will have your car, which you subscribe from us, but you don't own it, we own it.
So if I'm tired of it, about
you just return it. You just return it. But then we will explore more sophisticated models. Like, for example, some people will need a car only over the weekend, while other people will need the car in the week. And then once we are separated a little bit from this concept of I own the car and I take care for the car, it becomes a utility, a device. Then we can start sharing these cars. So then the car you have over the week, because you subscribed it, you may be willing to share with me if I need it in the lunch break. And I can, we are experimenting, and I think some of the models which are on the
we don't
podium
need
here.
only new car, we need new model to own them and to use them and to have them when we need them.
Yeah.
That's kind of the concept of Envoi. Envoi, thank you, Ori. You are a co-founder of Envoi. Can you explain us what kind of car sharing your company does?
So we are a community-based car sharing. We provide electric charging station and electric cars to communities. We also provide electric scooters and electric bikes because we believe that EV is the future. But we saw the change that is coming, but we realized that you got to address it properly. You got to educate the people what is an EV. You got to get data from the people how they're using the EVs, and together and provide those data points and make better solutions.
Why did you focus on communities? You have the idea of sharing electric cars is not new. There have been there's an offer like Blue LA outside. There was in Paris. It ended a fiasco, but there was a car-sharing electric system called Autolib. Why would you focus only on a community versus a complete city or a neighborhood?
For many reasons. I think that when you're trying to be part of a revolution, part of something of a big change, EV to the masses, you got to do it properly and you got to do it with a lot of data. You cannot just distribute. If it was just regular cars like Zipcar or the other guys, can you just distribute them and just do whatever you want? But when you talk about making a change, adopting people to new technology, and going together, working with municipalities, working with OEMs, working with regulators, and understanding there's a big need here. People need to move away from owning a car. People need to have multiple modes of transportation, relying on those modes of transportation, moving away from cars. EVs happens to be the next thing, right? The autonomous cars will be EVs. They will need charging infrastructure, but we need to learn how they're being used still. Community-based car sharing gives us the ability to do kind of a very narrow but very dedicated kind of analysis on how people are using the car, how frequent they're using the car, the car is being used, how many times somebody hits the brake, and how does it affect the battery. But if you start from a bite-sized kind of agreement, before that, I want to say something else. To support a good solution, you need to be affordable, it needs to be efficient, and it needs to be accessible. When you do a community-based car sharing and the car is literally parked at your doorstep.
So it's just like your own, it's there.
Exactly. It's the sense of ownership that we've been having for many, many years. I agree that changing everybody to EVs is not the solution because it still doesn't remove cars from the road. The sharing economy brings a solution to remove cars from the road. Again, with the regulations, with the OEMs, with everybody, now we can see a change that will take 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but it has to come, it has to be addressed right.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Stella to talk a bit about cars, but more your company is on bigger kind of devices, engines. You work a lot with buses. You also produce trucks. You also produce taxis. Why do you focus on fleets of professional vehicles as a market rather than the car for electric vehicles?
So actually, BYD as the largest battery manufacturer in the world, our mission and goal is to electrify every like a vehicle in the future. But then we analyzed the market. What's the major impact? So if you electrify one bus, so equipment you electrify 40 like electric vehicle, passenger vehicle on the street, and also in the initial so. Building the charging infrastructure is a challenge. So if you focus on like buses, taxi, and also trucks, like a commercial fleet, then it's easier to build in the charging station because it's always in the dedicated area, and then it's always in the government control. So this market can be driven by the government policy and with government funding, and then you can do the massive scope. So we have a good example, like a BYD headquarters in Shenzhen. So the city is like with 16 million population, and then like in the past 3 years, by end of 2017, they electrify 100% the buses. It's 16 buses, 100% electrified in a kind of a 4 years time frame. And this year, by end of this year, they will electrify 100% the taxi. So that is 15,000 car. But then the whole city, they're building the charging station, big charging station, and all the new building is built now. 20% of the parking space, they need to have a charger together. So this automatically also gave you incentive for the consumer car.
Okay, because they know it works. They see them on the street, so they see that there are chargers, so they can help them, push them towards electric cars.
And also, now you have a charging infrastructure. So you don't need to worry about it. You drive EV, you go out, you don't know like where to charge. But now any place, they went to the shopping mall, they went to the restaurant, they have access to charge. So then that's another data in Shenzhen is now 60% of the new car buyer is now focused on the EV. They're talking about the EV. I think Shenzhen is built up a good example. You start from fleet, 100% electrification, then the consumer will start to really open the eyes to buy the EV. Then at the same time, so you solve the charging infrastructure issue. So for BYD, we target every single market on this field, as long as it's 100% zero-emission vehicle. Yeah.
One problem with the cars, and you also have with the buses, is the price. If you people have a tendency to compare the price of an electric vehicle to the price of a combustion one, and it's always more expensive. How do you convince the cities, for example, to buy more expensive buses in a time where the money is not that, there's not that much money? It might be a difficult choice. How do you incent them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's the work we're every day working with each different city official, government, to see how we can do several steps. First is the policy. Just like in California, like Jerry Brown, like issued a bill for 2040 100% electrification, zero emission for the green for electricity, and then he also set up target by like 2030 on the California should have 5 million electric car. And then if you, like in Los Angeles, like a mega city just initiate, they call it like all the port, airport, and also city fleet by 2028, when the Olympic came, will be 100% electrification. So we think first government, you need to put legislation, tell them there's no future for gasoline car, for CNG car. Then we solve the next problem is price. So then the people will move. So actually for our bus in US, because in California, we have a HVIP money. So per bus, you got like a similar amount, like you pay 10% of, 9% of the sales tax, similar amount. So they give you that as like a voucher. So they have the like a 700 million fund from the tax, from the diesel through the ARB board. So they give this one. So this gave a lot of incentive for private company to buy the buses from us. Then they pencil out if after this incentive, then our price gap will be less than 60%. So then you think about driving 150 miles per day, then in 12 years lifetime, actually electric bus is almost 10% cheaper than the CNG bus, because you will save big money on maintenance, you'll save huge money on the fuel gas, and then it's very simple, easy to operate. So once we build this data, then the customer tries, they build up confidence, then the market will be rolling. So I would say in the initial step, government incentive is very important. But after that, it's the market will drive themselves. But at the same time, as a manufacturer, once your volumes being to the certain scope, the price will drop. So for example, this year, BYD already the fourth year to sell as the biggest EV company in the world. We will deliver close to 200,000 EV to the market. But the next year, our target is 500,000. So when we talking about 500,000, we're going to introduce 3 kind of different model attached to the low, affordable market.
Okay.
So in China, after the federal incentive, the consumer only pay around 50,000 RMB per vehicle. So this price is the equivalent to the gasoline car. So then our target is that you continue to carry this one by 2020. I think we don't need the government subsidy. Then the market will catch up because the price drop now.
Thank you very much. We'll stay on the government side and how the government can help the companies and the public using more and more electric vehicles. With you, Julia, you work for the German government. Germany is a big country for car making, but they had a really problem with the emissions and pollution in these recent times. How does the government cope with that? And how does it push the industry, the car industry, to change its model and to change its view?
Yeah, thank you. In Germany, we have this huge pollution problem. You might have heard that many cities really suffer from high pollution. So the government has set up a 1 billion program. Almost 400 million euros is for electrification. So we mainly support cities with the purchasing of electric buses, but also private households when they decide to purchase electric cars. Up till now, when it comes to the consumer decision, we are not really satisfied with the success of this program, I must admit that. We try to figure out what the reasons are. What we have figured out so far is that there is still the thinking in the mind of the people that the range is not sufficient. We have figured out that in most of the households where there's an electric car, it's just an extra thing.
Yeah, it's the second or the third car. It's not the first one.
Exactly.
It's not the first choice.
It's not the first choice, but the second or the third choice. So this is a huge problem, I think. And then it's also a question of creating nice and sexy cars. I mean, it's a consumer choice, and as long as the products are not as attractive as the combustion engine cars, it's a consumer choice. The politics can do nothing. Can only incentivize the purchase, but they cannot create the models, right?
Talking about incentivizing the model, do you give money to people when they buy an electric?
Yes.
That's something that we do in France. We have a bonus for some electric cars. The less the car has emission, the more you have a bonus. And you also have a malus. If you buy a big diesel car, you will actually be charged 3,000 or 4,000 euros more. That will help subsidize the good one.
We don't have a malus program, but we may have heard that we have a huge percentage of commercial cars in Germany, so we have a high commercial fleet.
Yeah, commercial fleets, yeah.
Exactly, so we decided to incentivize tax-wise the purchase of commercial cars. So it's too young or too early to say what the result will be, but we also, it's another measure to make it more attractive to purchase electric cars. Plus, I think it's also attractive to make other incentives like using the express bus lanes. If you have a electric plate on your car.
Is something that's done in Germany today? If you have an electric car, can you go to the bus lines, for example?
Yes. And I think also very interesting is the model what Austria decided to do a couple of days ago. They decided they have a speed limit on highways, and if you're an electric car driver, you are not. I think you can drive not 120 kilometers per hour, but 150, I think.
You can drive a bit faster if you're electric, right?
I'm sorry?
You can drive a bit faster if you're electric.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a good idea. And
sometimes it works, right? I mean, we have seen also the idea of giving the bus and express lines free to the electric vehicle drivers. We could see that people like that, and having a certain privilege sometimes can give a certain incentive to decide to purchase the product.
And what's your relation with the industry? You said we need some cars that would be more sexy, that would be nicer, that would be different. And the car industry is very on long term. We discussed that a bit with Katie in the beginning. In Germany, do you try to incent them? How do you deal with them? Or can you, for example, say we're going to be very hard on diesel or the most polluting engines? How do you deal with them?
I mean, the only thing politics can do is building up pressure, but we cannot intervene in their strategic decisions of the car manufacturing industry. I mean, they decide whatever they want, but we can see that we are really lacking attractive models. Also, when it comes to buses and to trucks, we also, incentivizing the purchase of electric buses, and there are very few manufacturers and suppliers that offer good products right now. So it's, I would say, the lack of good products is due to heavy, strategic faults. So the car manufacturer have made in my eyes.
So you tell them,
past.
Make good products. Katie, what would be the more incentive thing to develop the EV market today from your point of view? You will arrive in the market in 3 years. Is there a policy or a decision that could help the market from your point of view to shift from classical to electric?
Well, obviously policy can do a lot. And we have seen examples like in Norway, where they had traditionally very high taxes on cars, and they have in the last 10 years rebuilt these taxes to become taxes on not only on the price like it used to be, but on the CO2, the NOx emissions. So they made driving a conventional car expensive, and it was like all of a sudden super attractive to drive an EV, and the result is known. I think Norway, where were times then Tesla was the most sold car in Norway.
Okay.
So, but we also see as soon as these incentives go down a little bit, also the penetration goes down. So I think it takes some consolidated action. It takes a plan. And I think China is possibly most advanced having such a plan, because they're clearly saying in the next 10 years we want to be there, we want to have that many cars, but they also built the infrastructure, they set the incentives, they changed their taxation systems, they built the industrial players who can deliver that. Because if you sit in I think the problem we have in the Western states is a little bit what I mentioned in the beginning. We promise all together, the people, yes, you will all get electric cars and everything else will stay the same. You will have an electric SUV, every one of you, and nothing else will change. And that's not true. That's impossible. We will have cars, we will have electric cars, but we need for that an infrastructure. We need that we have different cars. It's not the same. We will not drive with electric 2.5 tons SUVs in our cities. There will be different cars. We need to share these cars. And it needs, I think, a consolidated action that we need to sit together, public, the governments, the city governments, the industry, also labor is important because this change is so big. It will impact how we employ people. It will impact what we do in our car factories. Electric cars are much simpler to build.
That's a problem we have with the car industry in France. We have
Yes.
many people, it takes much more people to make a classical combustion engine than to make an electrical one.
And then one more comment, and I think you're perfectly right. It's not done with just changing every car to become an electric car. It is also, we need to get less cars on the road. Possibly I'm one of the only car makers who would say that.
Yeah.
And we need to get into intermodal traffic, and I think this conference is great because it discusses it all the time. And again, the government needs to take a leadership to come up with a plan and transform society into it.
Yeah. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think that the way to look at everything is that we need to look at even different business models, because the old days where I'm a car manufacturer, I'm creating a car, I'm going to put it in a dealership, somebody comes, is going to buy it. That was the primary kind of business model, and then I'm going to support the car and maintain the car, et cetera, et cetera. Moving forward, I think the business model will change because now a car is actually a service tool. Maybe I can charge a subscription, maybe I can charge by the minute, maybe I can charge by the day, or maybe I can do X, Y, Z to change my business model, which affect the price point per your question. And I think one of the key factors that we see, and we also see it in infrastructure, it doesn't matter how much you incentivize people. If they don't want to use it, they're not going to use it. Yeah. It doesn't matter how much you're going to incentivize property owners to put charging stations in their property, they don't have time for it unless it comes with something that makes them like a value. For example, if you tie mobility with infrastructure and now they can see it as an amenity, I know I'm talking about Envoi right now, but you see it as an amenity that increase their NOI or affect their value proposition to their audience, oh, now we'll put an electric charging station. And that goes for the services and everything. You can incentivize people as much as you want, but if they don't want to take it, they're not going to take it. Nobody's going to dump their car for an EV because they're getting $4,500 rebate. But, and I think we should separate the thing between, there's the buses, the electric, there's the, I'll call it the government or the public transportation, which for me it should be a must.
Yeah.
The government should make a decision that they're moving from regular engines to electric engines throughout the fleet. And they have the budget, obviously, to do so.
Yeah.
On the private sector, you gotta feed the, like you gotta educate, you gotta introduce the new thing through. Uber is the best example. How many people here have used taxi as frequent as they're using Uber? No, none, right?
You have to, it's always the same question. You have to make it simple. You have to reduce frictions. What
Exactly.
your company is doing is that you provide a full service of that so that the community, whether it is a company or a real estate program, they don't have nothing, they just can provide and you take care of even cleaning the car.
Yeah, we do everything. It's a turnkey solution to the community. And by the way, community is a broad word. Community can be a street. Community can be a building, but we provide a turnkey solution so that the person or the company that offers that amenity, it's seamless to them, and for the user, they just download the app, access the car, and just drive away and take it from there and just use it.
And Katie was talking about we need different cars, different type of cars for different moments of our life or different communities. You provide it. You don't come with a one size fits all. You have various models that
Correct.
the communities can use from small, what
So it depends on the community lifestyle, because it's not about Envoi, it's about the community manager, if you will, to offer the lifestyle that fits their life, their community. So it can be a Tesla, it can be an e-Golf, it can be a Fiat 500e or a Nissan Leaf. It depends on what that community type, kind of what they need and what they want. Yeah.
Okay. Question about charging. It's a question that people also have, and it's a big friction. If I have an electric car, if I rent it, if I use it as a shared one, and I make a trip that's long, I want to be sure I will come back to my home. It's a big stress. How do you deal with that from a government point of view? Does Germany try to make forces cities or works on the infrastructure? How do you deal with that?
Part of our supporting program for electromobility is also the charging system. We can see now that we are lacking a good charging infrastructure. I mean, may also influence the purchase, the consumer's decision against or for an electric car. So we know that we have to do a lot more to incentivize the creation of a well-functioning charging system in Germany. We are not done with it yet. But
there's a problem of economical model with chargers, because when you put a gas station, we all know the economical model, we all have the math for that, but when you talk with industry that build or operate the chargers, it's quite complicated. How do you finance them? How do you make sure that they will give back money?
I mean, we are mainly focusing on, one example, when, on big supermarkets, for example, like where there are spaces, where there are parking lots, these are the one model or one possibility where somebody who is actually not in the charging business can, get some subsidies when he's ready to let a charging station installed there. So that can be, we want to get, everybody involved in that in order to get the best result out of it. So we cannot just leave it to a certain, let's say to the energy suppliers to build up the charging. We think that also, people, having a company and having normally the parking lots outside for the employers, that they also get involved and get some money when they set up a charging station there. So we think that everybody should get involved in that in order to, get a highly dense network of a charging infrastructure.
How does China deals with that? The charging system? Does the state put chargers more? What are the incentives for having chargers?
Yeah, I think in China the charging station infrastructure, they do a very good job. But because they order the utility company, you need the support.
So they can say the company, now do it.
Do it, yeah. And then the same time, the strategy they have, I think is very good. Like a government-owned facility, like an airport and the government city hall. So then mandatory, they need to install like a 40% of the location is charging station. Then if you're building a new building, you get the license to sign off, you need to have a 20%. Okay. So that is something they're doing very good job.
So you have to set up rules and obligations if you want people to act.
Exactly.
To do it.
Yeah, we are in Los Angeles. We see the biggest challenge is charging station because there is no very strong push. You leave to utility company to do, then it's a big mess. Okay. I apologize if somebody from utility SCE don't kill us.
Thank
but
you.
That's the challenge we're facing now. So as a car manufacturer, I want to add some word to your previous question. Our mission is design the car is more sexy and affordable. So you want to buy Tesla type of car with $30,000, and with speed. You don't want to compromise your driving luxury, joyful experience for the car. So I think currently we are in the very initial, like a rough stage, because a lot of EV, then you say, EV is a sacrifice on space, it's a slow speed, and then you lose luxury, the joy of the driving, enjoy the car. So actually, as a manufacturer, I think if you're talking to all the big auto company, they are the targets. We need to really design very sexy, beautiful car with all the intelligence, but also money-wise is affordable.
Yeah, what Tesla did it sexy, it had problems with the affordable part for the moment.
For rich people.
Which is not the easy one. I think we have time for a few questions. Does people, even if they own or don't an electric vehicle, have questions on the room? I cannot clearly see. Nobody has question about that? What would you advise? What's the feedback you have from the users of your solution at Envoi? Because you are on the direct use of the there's some lights, so I can see there are some questions, but the lights doesn't make any question. See, okay. Hi, I didn't see you. Sorry. No, I can't hear you. No, but I will. I can give you my microphone. Okay, so everybody will hear you.
Thank you. A question probably more for Mr. Newman at eVelocity. Especially in America, we have so much pride around car ownership. So I'm curious what that looks like in a model of shared vehicles and subscription. How do you still take the pride as an individual driving a car even though you don't own it?
No, that was my question.
That's a very good question, but it's a question about culture, in fact.
Yeah.
It's a pride to have a car. And the German manufacturers dealt a lot with that for a long time.
Yeah, it's a culture factor, and I get that very often, that question, and it's absolutely a fair question. And I must admit, I'm the biggest car guy in the world. So I collect classic cars, I love combustion engines, but I can also ask a question here. How many people came here with a horse? There's no one. Not even less than EVs. But if I would have asked that questions 100 years ago, most people would have said, yeah, I came somehow with a horse or a horse carriage or something. Things can change. And I think, for example, there's this famous pictures where you see Fifth Avenue in New York, 1900. You'd see one car and you see like 60 horse carriages. 15 years later, you see not a single horse, you just see cars.
And at the time, the car was seen as the solution to horse pollution.
Yes.
Yes, that's true. We had studies at that time saying that New York would be flooded because of pollution of horses.
So the world is changing, and I think our attitude is a cultural thing. That makes it more difficult for us in the West than for China, for example. Because I don't know if your father had a car. No. My father had a car, my grandfather had a car, and all of yours, I know that. I don't need to ask. So it's a cultural thing, but it will change. And in China, it will change first and go to a sharing economy where people don't own cars no more.
Yeah, the cultural part is important. How do you survey the people that share cars in the communities? What are the best advantage they take when you talk to them? What do they like in using your system?
The main factor is the convenience factor. It's that they have it when they need it and they have it at their doorstep. It's something they don't have to open a map and just look for it. They know where it is.
And they don't need to care for it if they don't use it.
Exactly. So you pretty much, in yesterday's world, as I like to say it, you pay 96, you use the car 4% of the time and you pay 100% of the time. In tomorrow's world, between service providers and car manufacturers, you're going to pay exactly for what you need, and that's what we do. I think the ease of use that we provide and the accessibility makes people really like it. And per the question of part of ownership versus part of usership, because that was the question, I think the fact that the subscription model does not take away from pride of ownership, because you can subscribe on a monthly basis. And you can subscribe that on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the cars is yours. So it still gives you kind of the sense of what you need.
You know that you will have one when you need one, which
Exactly.
is very important.
Exactly.
But you can live without a car in big cities. I live in Paris, I don't have a car. It's a chance that I have, but I am in a city that allows me not to have one. How does governments can work on that cultural part? Can they have ideas about that? Can they think about shifting the minds?
Of course. I mean, to reduce pollution, the number one or one of the main, ways to do so is reducing cars. It's not only a question of pollution, but also a question of traffic jam. I mean, if everybody's stuck in traffic jam, it's not good for a city. But it's not only a question of individual mobility, but also a question of commercial freight delivery in cities. With e-commerce, we could see a very high percentage and growth of freight in cities.
Yeah, especially with the e-commerce thing and
Exactly.
the Amazon delivery and all that kind of stuff. And that's why we need a complete range of electric vehicles.
Exactly.
Not only cars, but also trucks, but also
Exactly.
vans and all that stuff.
But we could clearly see, maybe it's also a question of generation. We could see a different form of behavior now when it comes to people living in a city in Germany. So me, myself, I don't have a car neither in Berlin. I think I have 2 friends in Berlin who have still an own car, but everybody else is just
A very European way is to make it so difficult to have a car in the city that you are happy not to have one.
exactly. No, but I think it's also a question of alternative. If a city has good offers, it's perfect to not owning a car, right?
So you need that's what all the LA CoMotion is about.
Exactly.
You need good public transport. You need
Exactly.
good services. You need on demand. You need to have a way to get back home,
It must
whatever
be,
the time,
exactly.
whatever the weather.
And it must be an integrated system. And this is only possible when you integrate also the public transport system. It only works with it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense in my eyes.
Thank you very much. I think it's about the.
I
there's another
have
question.
one
Yes,
question.
Mr. Okay.
Can you hear
Go.
me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so it's sort of based on what you were just talking about. There have been a lot of panels this weekend talking about the integration of services, public transportation, Uber, Lyft, scooters, bike share. I see a sort of chief impediment to that being the auto industry and the way it's typically operated, because not only are they going to have to change their profit model in the short term, they're going to have to deal with significantly less profit. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about that a little, because I think there have been discussion on numerous panels about the need to unify pricing. So for multimodal transit.
Yeah, all this mobility as a service that was almost all panels today and yesterday is always presented as a way that will make people live without a car and stop owning a car. So how does the government, for example, can deal with that and can help that? Do you in Germany are in favor of a multimodal efficient solution that could
Definitely. And if I would be a car manufacturer, I would make up my mind how to earn money other than just selling cars, right? I mean, there are so many car manufacturers already involved in car sharing models, in any other models. It's not about selling cars. It's, there are different ways of earning money. But it's not my business, it's not my job, but I'm pretty sure there are smart people making up their mind about
Katie,
it.
you're in the business. Do you think you have been in with the regular car? They all announced some sharing system. Do you think they are really sticking to it and they have understood the message, or will it take time for them?
Well, having been there, I think it's like really hard for them, because, for example, sharing. You can say, yeah, young people in large cities, they share cars. But I think what the OEMs really believe that most of us still want a car, and that we will buy these cars and we will get older, we can drive even if we're 80. So they think overall it's not so bad. I would say owning a car is a model of the past, and it will take maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, and at least in the big cities, in 20 years, no one will own a car. We will use a multimodal transportation system. So if you say it that radical, you really put in question your existing business model. And they are so depending on that model, and they are stuck in like relations with dealerships, with responsibility for 10,000s of employees. So it takes a lot to transform yourself, to disrupt yourself in this way, while you are struggling with your business. You have tax concerns, you have emission concerns, you have to solve this, or you're in a super competitive market. You have to work all day to get it right, and then at 5 o'clock in the evening, okay, now I become a startup entrepreneur, now I disrupt myself, now I become a service company. It's not going to work.
That's
So
why you get out and
that's
you
why I
decide
got
to,
out,
to disrupt yourself. Thank you very much to all of you. I think they deserve a round of applause.
Thank you.
And I see Greg is about to take the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benoit. Thank you to our panelists.